So let's pivot a little bit and talk about some other drivers of the rental economy right now. And again, going back to everybody's biggest fear, are we going to have another 2008, 2009? Are there any other drivers that you guys can think of, and I'll talk about a couple in a minute, that we need to be watching, or the average independent should be watching out there, or the national rental company even, to know where they think the market's going to go and how it's changing?
If I jump in there, John?
Please.
All right,
I was actually going to beg you to.
No. So here's what I've seen is I've been blessed with I get to travel all over the U.S. and North America. I'm literally in a plane every day. And as I've gone up into Canada, as I've gone all over the United States, I'm going to tell you right now, I think that a lot of the mega projects are having rippling effects on the U.S. economy. A lot of people don't realize this, but just recently they found in Nevada and in Arkansas two of the largest lithium deposits on the planet. And the one they found in the lithium deposit, I really recommend somebody Googles it. It's incredible. The lithium deposit they found in Nevada is the single largest deposit in the world. It's valued in the trillions of dollars. And I realize, and it's a pure level of lithium. It's easier to mine. It's in better. I'm not a lithium expert, but you got to believe that when you look at major equipment, and batteries are a hot item right now. We're seeing it in our equipment industry. We're seeing it all over the world. The Tesla car we drove up in today had lithium-ion batteries in it. And as people are saying, we need to look at batteries as a bigger option. The biggest expense is mining that lithium, and we're shipping it into the United States from either Africa or China. And as we're now have the biggest source in the world in America, I think the amount of mining, the fact that it's a major mining site, it's going to gobble up a lot of equipment. But right now, microchips, the United States invested billions in microchip manufacturing. We all see these mega projects, and they're gathering up so much equipment that I think it's having a rippling effect. Not just that one job's taking it, but if you're going to build a huge mining, guess what? Now there's the support buildings. Now there's the service work for all of that equipment. There's the mining camps. There's somebody who needs to build the mining camps. There's somebody who needs to service it. There's the porta pots. The rippling effect of how that revenue comes into the United States, I think is going to keep our economy fairly stable, because we've had some really good things happen in the last 4 to 5 years that are affecting us either directly or indirectly.
Yeah, it is interesting that you mentioned that, because I have seen so many large projects. And when you read the annual reports for the national rental companies, the publicly traded rental companies, they talk about really large projects and mega projects. I've got one near my house that isn't anywhere near a mega project, but it's a server center, data farm, and they built a parking lot for hundreds of cars to park there to build this place. They have police officers that help them get in and out every day, and it's going to employ 60 people when it's done. But it takes hundreds of people every day working on this thing to build it, and a ton of rental equipment. My fear, though, and why I want to talk about these so people know what to look for, is what if some of these mega projects don't get off the ground, or they slow down, or some of the financing for some of these backs off? I mean, that could have a real impact. I've heard of a number of mega projects where they were going to build a battery plant or something like that, and they either put it on hold or canceled it. If these projects don't continue, or if they were to slow down, or something like that happened in the process, what do you think the ripple effect would be?
It's huge. I mean, we have one customer right now who told our sales manager, he said he had 16 projects on the wall, and he says, they're all shovel ready, full permits in place. They haven't had a single approval to start any one of those projects. So there's definitely a ripple effect if it doesn't get started. The good thing is that a lot of them are getting started.
Yeah.
So a lot of them are getting started. I think interest rates definitely slowed down, in the past year and a half, slowed down a lot of them from getting started. But I think that once the interest rates have stabilized, and I do think that, people are going to get more comfortable with where we are right now. I think people expected the economy to go in a different direction than it did right now. The economy has pretty much stayed stable, not great, but stable. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what people want to see. It's an election year, which I have said my whole life. Uncertainty does not do well for any industry, especially for our industry. I don't think uncertainty. And I have no empirical data on this, but I have said my entire life, opposite of the mega projects, which everything Elliot said is true. I said our industry, especially the little guys, like Nickel was a little guy, Durante's always been a little guy. We do well when somebody builds a pool. When somebody decides to put a driveway in, when somebody decides to do their front sidewalk, or somebody puts up a little 2-story, or a little 3-family townhouse, we really do well, right? When everybody's doing that, because that is when you got your major projects occupying that equipment, so the big guys don't really care about the guy building the pool, and you got the little guys like us, we can really focus on that. So, I'm of the belief that we need everybody at every level, including the guy using one little excavator and the guy doing a mega project, to make the whole thing work.
So here's the fear, though, and this one is definitely for you, Elliot, because you've lived through this. Last time we've had a really big shock to the system, you saw the larger rental companies go down market. I'm a believer, and we could probably discuss this at some point, but you kind of mentioned it. The independent, their bread and butter is smaller and mid-sized contractors, landscapers, local builders, those kinds of people. And what we saw in 2009 is the larger rental companies that were typically distracted by these bigger projects all of a sudden went down market, and they were going after the bread and butter and the core customer. Ahern did it to me. Thank you, sir. They came into Atlanta and hadn't been there before because they had fleet availability, and made it really difficult because now they were coming after what I would consider my core customers, where normally they'd be focused on all those big people. How at risk are we if any of this slows down? And related to that, do you think there is much risk of it slowing down with the mega projects?
Great 2-part question. So the first part of it is, I think, like I said at the beginning, it's all about utilization. And I think that when any of the big companies, and we'll just call them the Big 10, if any of the Big 10 sit and they look at their fleet and they're like, look, we see economic slowdowns, utilization slowdowns. Some of the big projects didn't kick off. Is every one of them, the strength that they have that some of the smaller guys like John doesn't have, is that if Atlanta's not moving your hometown, all they do is say, look, those 3 big projects that we planned on in Atlanta aren't happening. They didn't do the college. They look at it and they say, look, we're sitting at 40% utilization or 35% utilization. And then all of a sudden somebody makes a decision in an executive office and they don't sell the fleet, as you mentioned. They move it to another market. And they say, hey, we've got a market in Phoenix, and Phoenix is booming right now, and Phoenix is at 73% utilization. They could use an extra 200 units. John doesn't have that ability. The majority of rental companies don't have that ability. When you had your family's 5 locations, guess what? If you had too much fleet, you had too much fleet. You couldn't say, I want to ship it to New York City. It was where it was. So I think that that's a power that the bigger companies have that the smaller independents don't. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the things that Ahern did, is when I worked for him, is if we saw that the economy slowed down, Don Ahern said, well, let's move into New York City because it's a big market and they're not seeing the slowdown. When we saw the...
let's move in New York City 3 blocks from Durante Rentals.
That's right. Or here's the other one. I was down here. I was part of the growth into Florida, is when 2020 happened. They said, all right, well, let's look at moving into the Gulf and moving into Florida because we had to get our utilization up. And I think that could be a huge factor where it's not the best thing for the smaller rental company, but the big guys have that power. How to combat that? I think that there has been a big move recently, and we're seeing it in a lot of different ways, is that people are looking for, and COVID made people go more local. And I hate to say it, but people looked to what is nearby, what is close, what is convenient. And I think that people still like to buy local. I think they want to contribute to their own economies. Mm-hmm. And I think that they realize that the big box stores and some of the big companies out there, they kind of want to help the local guy out. And I think it's kind of a superpower for some of the independents, is that rather than try and compete on a national big giant scale, I say you find your market and you just become the absolute best at your market. I mean, if you're great at building swimming pools, guess what? Some of those big blue companies and big orange companies and big green companies, guess what? They don't give a damn about the pool. But that's your bread and butter. And I'll tell you right now, I'll take 15 swimming pools that don't file for bankruptcy over one big giant tilt-up warehouse that ran out of financing. We've gone and I was part of in Vegas with a big blue company, and there was a job called Fountain Blue. If you Google Fountain Blue, they just finished the project in the last year and last 18 months. The crazy thing is Fountain Blue, I was part of that project in 2007. Now,
wasn't that Carl Icahn originally?
There was a bunch of companies involved with it, but it was crazy because I remember going onto that project. Now, when you mentioned the failure, that was one of the ones where, imagine a project that takes 15 years to complete because they ran out of funding and nobody wanted it. And I just think that if we're going to really survive, I say you got to find your people. You got to find your market. Don't try and be everything to everyone. If the big giant rental companies want to tie up all their assets on a mega project, yeah, it's beautiful to put 100 pieces out, but guess what? They're not great rates. They're not great utilization. They're not great care for your equipment. It's easy because you can put them out, put them and forget them, which is awesome when you're a business owner. When you're putting stuff out to Tom and Linda building their pool, they'll call you 5 times with questions. So it's a lot more work for not quite as much money. But I think that there's a place where if you find your people and you do it right, sky's the limit.
I think that's so true. And one of the things that I'm thinking about right now, too, is I do think that we're feeling a little bit of a relatively short-term blip because of interest rates. One of the things that
blip up or blip down?
Blip down.
Okay.
One of the things that really impacts particularly your local rental company is those pools, those backyard oases, those types of things. In 2008 and 2009, those disappeared because people's houses were worth less than they owed on them, and that was a huge problem. It's not like that. People have equity in their house. The problem is over the last couple of years, they already built that backyard oasis. They already did all that work that they wanted to do just in the last couple of years. And to add on to that, the biggest time that people make those investments on redoing the kitchen or rebuilding that pool or building a pool in general is when they move. And people aren't moving right now because they've got these amazingly low interest rates and they're afraid to take the risk to move again. So I think we have a little bit of a rubber band that we're pulling right now where people are trying not to move because the interest rates that they have on those loans are so good, but that's also causing them to not do some of that renovation work. And what's going to happen, and I think this is probably 6 to 12 months, as soon as those interest rates start to come back down, that rubber band's going to snap, those people are going to start to move, and when they start to move, they're going to do the kitchen. They're going to build the backyard oasis. And I think that's going to really help independence.
See, and I thought, and I was part of it, I was like a lot of people, they found in America, and it's funny because I went and I talked to a lot of the smaller rental companies. I talked to a ton of them that are 1 to 2 shops that would be called your mom and pop local shop. That when everybody was stuck at their house, they twiddled their thumbs for about 10 days. And then they realized, look, if we're going to be stuck at our house or we're going to work from home, there's a big push for that, is that if we're going to be at our home all the time, let's invest in our home. Mm-hmm. And it became kind of an American thing to do is build that backyard oasis, build that koi pond, renovate the house, put on an extension, because everybody that I talked to for the smalls, they were like, good Lord, I get it that the big mega rental companies, one of them that I worked for, they saw a massive slowdown in 2020, 2021. Mm-hmm. But then you go to the local shop. I pulled up to Home Depot just to pick up something, and there were 3,000 people there, and you had to wait in line to get a dump trailer because people were doing so much work at their house.
Almost everybody was having record years.
Yeah, and I think what happened is kind of your thing is I agree completely with the interest rates, but I think that everybody did so much work that now there's kind of that, you know what, we're going to pump the brakes. But I think that if the interest rates are right and the money's right, I think people learn that habit of we can do the renovations and we can increase what we've got.
Totally.
Let's do it.
Yeah. It's that combination of we just did that thing that we wanted to do because we were stuck at home and we're not moving, so there's no reason to do it to the new place because we don't have a new place right now. So going back to watching what some of the nationals may be doing and how that may be impacting things, you know, one of the things that I'm a little bit uncomfortable with is the stock market has gotten addicted to the publicly traded companies' growth.
Yep.
I mean, if you watch what happened with their stock, you know, they were lumped in with industrials, in 2020 and 2021. And they were doing exceptionally, but they were getting pummeled with all the rest of the industrials. And now the stock market has realized that these things function really well in tough economies. These rental companies are in a growing industry. They're outpacing construction. All of this stuff is great. So they're addicted to that growth. And I think that United and Sunbelt and everybody else can continue to grow like that. But they have to be able to satisfy that growth. And so the other thing that I'm concerned about is how they're going to satisfy it. If they don't satisfy it with mega projects, or if they satisfy it with mega projects, are there other things that we could be watching that might continue to allow them to show the growth that they want to the stock market, and not have to go back down market to small and mid-sized contracts? So another one that I'd be curious about your opinions on is international growth. United, Sunbelt, Herc, Sunset, all of those folks are, for the most part, very North America focused. But Sunbelt has a big UK. United just purchased Orangehire in Australia, 8 locations. They've got skid steers, mini excavators, traffic control. You know, do you think they're going to stop at 8? You know, I heard at HRIA, like the Australian version of ARA, that everybody's sitting around the bar at night after that's been announced, and it's like, have they called you? Like, who else is on the list?
Oh, wow.
You know? So I think they could also satisfy some of this demand for growth that the markets have for them by expanding internationally. United also bought somebody in the Netherlands that was publicly announced.
And they do have big regional players. I mean, Coates and Canards.
They do.
Other ones are. It's like they can easily enter a market with
Europe,
1 or 2 big purchases.
Australia. Some of those markets, they're already English-speaking markets. Sunbelt already has a strong presence in Europe. Do you think that maybe that they might start to expand more beyond North America,
Hopefully.
and that could be a distraction for you?
Hopefully. Yes, I think you should go that way.
John says that's if you're at a national rental company and you're in a leadership position, John says that you should focus on international growth right now. I'm sorry for my international
100%,
friends.
100%.
See, and I think you're exactly right. And it's kind of interesting because you made me start thinking as I realize I look at the international markets. You're exactly right. But the other thing that I see that they're doing a ton of is they're diversifying into market. Like when I worked for Big Blue, when I worked for United Rentals, it was mainly what I would call, and they called it Gen Rent and Aerial. That was it. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden now we're seeing Pump and Power. Then we see Trench. Now we're seeing, where they're doing special events and concerts, and now they're having divisions that do nothing but emergency response. Now they're doing small tool divisions, and every one of these rental companies, they're looking at how do we capture as much market share as possible. I hate to say it, but when I worked for United Rentals, mind you, that was 20 years ago, 20 years ago when I worked for them, if somebody would have told me you could go get a United Rentals porta pot, you know what I would have told you? Like, flush that idea. But that was my dad joke for the day. But here's the thing. Now, like, everybody's looking for that. Everybody's like, look, I want a one-stop shop. I want somebody that's going to take care of everything I want. So I think it's interesting that they're diversifying so much.
Right.
And I think that they're gaining as much market share as they can on anything that's in the rental market. But I think you're exactly right. They're going to say, hey, the economy, the stock market is demanding even bigger double-digit increases. And the only way we're going to find that revenue is we've conquered North America. We're going up into Canada. We've got all the oil and gas. We really got it. I think they're going to start looking at, and you're right, they didn't have to do a lot of rebranding going to Australia. If you go into Mexico, you got to change the language on every single product you've got. If you go into France, you got to change every language. Where they can break into Australia, they could break into England, and there's not a lot of rebranding they got to do. Yeah. So that initial market penetration is relatively inexpensive.
I hear a lot of interesting things here. We've got specialty, we've got large projects, mega projects, we've got international growth. We know that contractors in uncertain times like to rent versus buy. Rental penetration is increasing. We've got a potential rubber band here with smaller contractors and people starting to move. I'm starting to feel kind of good right now.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I feel better than when I walked in the door today. Is that just me?
No, I mean, the one thing I do want to add to specialty, to Elliot's point, is that I know for a fact that the big guys have realized that the specialty is higher profitability for them. Higher utilization and higher profitability. And I think that's why you have seen such a strong push by the big guys to open up these special divisions and really, really the flooring, the trenching, the gen divisions and stuff like that. So I do think that that's whet their appetite, and I think you're going to start to see even more of that because of that.
I agree with you. I think that the market, you mentioned, I feel good about it. I feel good about it too. But I think the thing is like I said earlier from my mentor who said, companies go broke in good times, not in bad times. Mm. And I think the thing that if we're going to take anything out of this is that people need to sit right now and they kind of need to evaluate how are we doing business. And more importantly, how are we going to do business as an industry, not just your individual company? I realize each one of us thinks about our own needs and our own company but as an industry, how do we make sure that we set ourselves up for survival going forward and that we don't undermine ourselves? Like people say, hey, well, rental's going up, which is great. The more people that are buying it, outstanding. But the problem is if the costs go up exponentially, mm-hmm. if the cost of maintaining goes up exponentially, if all of those costs go up, but we're not willing to either change our services, hold our rates, if we've got people that are coming in and they're not looking at running it like a smart business, but they're looking at it for short term because they're looking to get bought out, and they make dumb short-term decisions that have ripple effects inside the entire industry. I think we need to be smarter as business owners to make sure that we continue our success and we're not playing the game like a lot of people are who are jumping into the market and they're building a business to sell it. We discussed last night at dinner that there's people right now where they're desperate to sell. You know what I mean? I mean, the kind of when Durante Equipment, everybody knew they had made strategic moves with the company because they wanted to plan on selling and they wanted to make a very attractive company for that. Oh, Durante Rentals, yes. Yep. Durante Rentals in New York. Thank you for that correction. Durante Rentals in New York made strategic moves specifically to sell. You mentioned Rental Max was a surprise, but I think some of the other companies, whether or not they're trying to sell, and because of that, they're increasing their utilization. They're trying to make their EBITDA look better, mm-hmm. and they're doing short-term moves that are having long-term effects on our entire industry.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because when I talked to people over the last couple of years, they were essentially like, I'm never going to sell my business. It's amazing. I wake up and I make money. I'm never going to sell my business. And now I talk to those same people and they're like, I have to work kind of hard at this. And it's amazing how quickly that mentality changes. But one of the things that keeps me up at night that we haven't discussed, and I don't hear discussed a whole lot in the industry, we talk about rental penetration and how great that is and how it's increasing and how we're over 50% of equipment on a construction job site is rented versus owned. But it can't get over 100%. There is a wall coming. And you talk about some categories, like let's take access and aerial, MUPs. I think a lot of people would estimate we have around 80% rental penetration. We don't track that specifically, but that's kind of the rule of thumb in the industry is that that's one of the more heavily rented categories. There's not a whole lot of percentage points left before you run to 100%. You're not going to get 100%, 10% penetration, and really you're not going to get 100% rental penetration. At some point, people are going to own some stuff. Maybe it's 5% that they own, 10% that they own, so maybe we can get to 90%, 95%. There's going to be a wall somewhere, though, where all of a sudden competition changes because you're not chasing the growth of the industry. The industry or markets actually get tapped out. I don't think we've seen very many markets that have gotten tapped out because rental is a young, growing industry with lots of opportunity, whether it's through consolidation or expansion into specialty or changing contractor mentality to rent more versus own. The idea of the sharing economy and younger people being more comfortable with not owning everything that they have, and so they're renting their excavator. But you can't go over 100%.
Wow. Yeah. That's a big can to open. You're exactly right. And I agree with you 100%. We can't go 100%. And we've been making massive gains in making people realize, like you said, and the younger generation, I truly believe if they sit there and they said, look, why would I own an asset that I'm not using all the time? We've even seen car ownership has gone down. Why would I buy my teenager a car when we can share the one I have, and if I can't drive them, I just call an Uber. It's so much cheaper. And I think that as an industry, now that we're teaching people that rental is a phenomenal option, and it's a good alternative so you don't have your capital tied up, I hadn't thought about, eventually we're going to reach that breaking point where it's going to stop and people are going to say, okay, well, this is about the maximum that we're willing to rent, and then there has to be the car that we own. There has to be the excavator that we own. I would like to say that we're probably, just based on fleet availability and the changing of the guard with those younger people coming up, I think that changing of the guard is still 10 to 15 years away. But I think the projection that you put in people's mind of how do we prepare for a slowdown where we've been growing nonstop. I mean, there's never been, quote, enough fleet.
Yeah.
And I think that we're starting to see some of it where now that rental companies, and I mean, my entire career when I was with Big Blue and when I was with Orange is when I was with all these companies, we sat between 62 and 82% utilization constantly. And now all of a sudden you're starting to see companies and they're like, yeah, we're at 59% utilized. And for me, it's like, whoa, what's going on? Eventually that day is going to come because people are buying enough fleet and they're going to realize we don't need more. We've got what we need. And then you're going to get on a regular rotation of, we buy 7, or what did you call it? 1/7 of your fleet every year. And it's going to kind of slow down a little bit. And then where do we go? I mean, do we start looking at other markets?
Right.
Or better fleet?
It's the normal life cycle of an industry. So it's not unexpected if you compare it to other industries. You think about like the personal computer industry. When I was a kid, like Dell, HP, Compaq, Apple, like everybody was killing it, just selling computers. How much do we talk about the amazing growth at Dell or anymore, or the amazing growth in Apple laptops? I mean, all those companies do well, but people have laptops who need laptops. And so now they're just replacing them as they need them. We're going to get to a space in rental. It's a younger industry, so we have a runway. And I agree completely with your 10 to 15 year analysis. We have runway, but at some point we're going to hit a point where the amount of rental that people need, we supply. And the only growth comes from, just like other industries, inflation, maybe some new products here or there, maybe some changes, maybe some getting into different specialty or something like that. But for general rental on a construction job site, eventually it's just going to be replacement. And it's just going to be a bit regular business like any other industry.
Well, I think it's going to depend on, our infrastructure is definitely aging. That's going to create demand as we need to start fixing it. So it's going to depend on the projects that are happening in America, because we can still grow if the market is growing. On top of that, to Elliot's point, is that if people needed, you had mentioned the guy that needs an excavator, but it used to be where if a guy needed 10 excavators in his company, he would probably own 12. And I think that over the last few years, the guys that still want to own, I think there's a lot of them that have become, if I need 10, I'm going to own 8. And I'm going to rent the 2. And I think we still have time on that as well, as they scale that back even more and more, where they go from 8 to 6 to 5 to say, I only want to own 2 that I'm really moving around, and I will rent my others when I do need them. So I do think we have that advantage as well for a while. I don't know. You're right. I guess I never really thought of it. At some point, you do have to max out. But I do also see, and I have no empirical data on this either, but I see, like, let's say boom lifts. I see 45-foot boom lifts. Recently, I feel like, and I say recent, I'm talking the past few years, in areas where I feel like I never saw them before. Like I see them on projects where, it might only be like a 2-story project that I'm like, just traditionally, you might have seen a boom, but you might not have seen a boom. And I feel like now I'm seeing equipment in places that I've never seen before. And I really haven't put a lot of thought into why and how, but it could be that people more and more are finding rented equipment as a benefit to getting their job done more efficient, smarter, whatever it is. So, and I don't know the effect. I don't know if what I'm saying is true or not, but I just feel like there's a larger, I drive by some sites and I'm like, wow, like I can't believe how many pieces they have sitting on that particular site as opposed to what you might have seen years ago.
And there's opportunity for that. That's a really good point.